Now your host, Jim Villanucci.
Coming up on the Daniels Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Cool Tech Hotline, we're going to talk to Tom Rinaldi, reporter for ESPN. He's worked on golf coverage, Sports Center, Outside the Lines, College Game Day, Sunday NFL Countdown, and he even did a feature for horse racing, Sam.
The voice of storytelling at ESPN. This is a real honor for us.
Tom, how are you? Tom Rinaldi.
There you go.
Tom, how are you, sir? Thanks for doing this.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
So how did you first learn of the Blackfeet Nation Boxing Club?
The subject of the documentary, which airs tomorrow night on ESPN, 7:30 Eastern, it was brought to my attention by the co-director of the piece, Kristen Lapis. She's been a partner that I've worked with on many features that we've told across the years. She's just been a spectacular producer and director. And when she first presented the idea to me, I was drawn to it as much for the latest opportunity to work with her as for the very initial understanding I had of it, guys. And as you know, from when you cover things and begin to meet people, you begin to learn what you didn't know. You begin to know what you had no idea about, and that really drew me into the story.
I was reading some of the reviews, and they're all good, but they say if you're looking for an easy-to-watch, fluffy kind of fun story, this is not it. This is pretty intense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know about it being intense. Well, what I would say is it's real. And what it does is it marries two stories together, really, in a broader context of what's known as MMIW, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Movement and the plight, where the statistics, guys, which I did not know about, just absolutely left me astounded. That Native American women 10 times more likely to be murdered than non-Native women, that 1 in 3 suffers sexual assault, that 8 out of 10 experience violence at some point in their lives. It was in that context and through the telling of one young woman who has disappeared and her family's efforts to find her that we marry that story to the creation and the mission of the Blackfeet Nation Boxing Gym, founded by a former boxer and amateur named Frank Kipp. And his efforts not only to teach the girls and the young women on the reservation the sweet science of boxing, but also the survival skills that they might need given the vulnerability of the population overall.
We're talking to Tom Rinaldi, the voice of storytelling at ESPN. What's Frank Kipp's story? What kind of a guy is he?
Yeah, he's fascinating. He's one of those larger-than-life figures that pours so much good into the world. Frank was an amateur himself. He was a welterweight, fought 38 bouts, and he came from a long lineage of boxers in his family, and himself a Blackfeet boxer. He ultimately went to work. He's had a variety of different jobs, including, guys, probation officer on the Blackfeet Reservation, and it was there that he began to see firsthand with devastating effect the damage being done to the young women and the girls on the reservation, and his frustrations over the lack of justice that those families were receiving for their loved ones, for their daughters. And he really felt there must be something I can do. That led to the creation of the boxing club. Frank is an absolutely great character, and one of the other, we spotlight two young women who show a lot of promise as fighters over our year of shooting. And one of them is Frank's daughter, Donna, who's an outstanding talent herself.
Talking to Tom Rinaldi, and he has trained 500 people in the past 20 years?
He has, meaning training in a very broad term.
Sure.
Frank would be the first one to tell you that, meaning that he's not going to turn anybody away who comes to the gym. And what he has found is that through the growing plight of MMIW and the power and the terrible cloud that spread across the Blackfeet Reservation from the disappearance of Ashley Loring Heavy Runner, who was just a bright soul in every respect, who disappeared, more and more girls, guys, and young women were walking through the doors of this very modest boxing club, basically a glorified warehouse on the reservation. And they were coming, pushed there in many cases by their families. Not so much that they might win medals or trophies, even though many have, but to try to develop the survival skills that might serve them in peril way outside a boxing ring.
Talking to ESPN's Tom Rinaldi, you can watch Blackfeet Boxing Not Invisible documentary tomorrow at 5:30 on ESPN. And so, Tom, you brought up the point that I wanted to ask you about, because the way I understand it, it was just as much about self-defense as it was about the actual boxing part of it, right? Where he was trying to help out with for women and for girls so they would be able to defend themselves, right?
Absolutely. But at the same time, we don't want to minimize the real talent and promise of the two boxers who we spotlight, Donna, Frank's daughter, and Mamie Kennedy, who, for example, again, just within the ecosystem of this small gym, as she begins to flash real talent and promise, Frank puts her into sparring sessions with boys uniquely until, you guessed it, none of the boys in her weight class or her age want to spar with her anymore because of her ferocity and because of her skill. And we begin to see through Mamie's incredible candor and what she's willing to share about the different pressures that are on her in her home life, the other temptations around her, all the things that she's trying to navigate to try to keep boxing a part of her life. That's part of what unfolds across the documentary.
Blackfeet Boxing, you can watch it tomorrow at 5:30 on ESPN. Blackfeet Boxing Not Invisible, about the Blackfeet Nation Boxing Club in Montana. So did you get a chance to go up to, I assume you got a chance to go up there, right, Tom?
Yes, Joe, absolutely. And
so, yeah,
spend time with the fighters and spend time with Frank and Ember Kipp, who really guide and form and have gone through a lot of sacrifice themselves to keep the gym sustainable and running. So, and you know, guys, I'll just say this. There's right now, it seems as though there's such a huge appetite, isn't there, for sports documentaries and for these stories that go beyond just the score and beyond the seasons that are all on pause right now, as much as we desperately want them to come back. And I think one of the reasons for that is because sport in their soul is aspirational. And that's something we can all relate to, the hope and the determination that we find in so many of our athletes. And even though these are athletes whose names you don't know, who aren't written in boldface type, and who don't get national coverage frequently, hopefully we hope that there's an audience that will find their determination just as relatable and just as powerful.
Very much looking forward to that tomorrow at 5:30 on ESPN. So just being up there, Tom, beyond the experience at the boxing club, you shared a story with us about one of the sparring sessions, but just the general environment and being up there, being a part of being on the reservation. Just what were some of your takeaways just from the whole collective experience of spending some time up there?
I think there were a few, but the simplest takeaway was the incredible spirit that Frank has engendered within the club. And by that, what I mean is that he's created what we most desperately hope any coach creates for our young people. And that's a safe space where girls, boys, young men, young women can come, compete, but also feel supported, feel encouraged, feel challenged, feel nurtured, and feel that they can fail. They can fail with some safety as much as they pursue their goal of success and of winning. And all of that emanates from the boxing club. Beyond that, guys, I'll tell you that the reservation in winter is, and you guys know, being in Albuquerque, you're in a temperate climate, the temperatures, I know, soar there, and they can certainly soar in the reservation in summer, and they can be absolutely punishing in the winter, where it becomes a frozen and really forbidding landscape. The reservation is larger than the state of Rhode Island. And in terms of the tribal police force, enlisted and commissioned to protect all who live there? About 24. If that doesn't give you an idea of the challenge of trying to make certain people are protected and safe and receive justice, I don't know what would, just the sheer scale of it.
I guess it goes to show you the power of one person with one idea, what they can accomplish for people.
And, one of the great blessings in sport, guys, and one of the great blessings in being able to tell stories is how many of those incredible folks there are out there that commit themselves with such absolute dedication and the best of intention, seeking no glory, no credit. The only fulfillment that they get is the fulfillment of knowing I helped. I touched somebody. I was here to help with somebody. And we certainly found that inspiration, not only in Frank and in Donna, but in the families surrounding so many of the girls and the young women who we saw and who we spent time with when we were on the reservation.
We're talking to Tom Rinaldi. This is a story. This is a guy who could have been easily a never told story.
Exactly. And Kristen did a great job. She found Frank has been written about largely in local media because he's been doing it for quite a while. And to be honest, I think Frank, and certainly Donna did, they were a little bit leery of here we are. That they knew about ESPN. We're bringing in a pretty extensive and one of the best, if not the best, film crew guys in the country. The crew that shot the Last Dance interviews is the crew we had with us. These incredibly talented young men, Tom and Vin from Seventh Movement Films. They shot the interviews. They shot almost all of the footage that you see in Blackfeet Boxing, Not Invisible. And over time, the trust and the fellowship and the connection grew during our reporting and telling of the story. We very first screened it, guys, back just before the pandemic really swept across the country in February in Montana. And we had the Kips there, and they were incredibly nervous to watch it. And it's a moment I'll keep with me for a long time. But when it was over, they received a standing ovation. And it was fantastic to see the family so touched and moved by that.
And you can watch the documentary tomorrow night on ESPN. Tom, we love hearing your voice. We don't hear it enough. What else can we look forward to that you're working on after this documentary airs tomorrow?
So during the pause, we're fortunate. Storytelling has remained busy, guys. We certainly hope that people have had the chance to check out The Last Dance, which was nothing short of a social phenomenon without sports. The Be Water on Bruce Lee, the phenomenal work done on Lance Armstrong, the look back at this Sammy Sosa and McGuire, all of that. So we have a lot more special projects in the pipeline. In terms of me and the sports that I cover, whether it be tennis or the U.S. Open or Wimbledon would have started, guys, right now. And it's amazing to think that the event is just not postponed, but canceled for this year. U.S. Open, the USTA is determined that will happen. If so, I'll be there in Queens for it. But my fall, guys, is spent largely, typically, on college football. And right now, the uncertainty surrounding that particular sport, I think, is almost unique in its degree. The NBA's worked hard, the NHL clearly, but college campuses being open and all of the different systems that have to be at work and working safely with proper protocols for college football games to be played, that remains a real and serious open question. A lot of people determined to make it happen. We'll see.
Tom, great stuff. We appreciate you. Thanks for your time,
Thanks
sir.
Thanks so much, guys, for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right. Do make a point to watch that tomorrow at 5:30 on ESPN. The story about the Blackfeet Nation Boxing Club in Montana. That was Tom Rinaldi, the voice of storytelling. at ESPN.
Yeah, so he's talking about it being cold up there. So not only is it in Montana, but the
cold part of Montana.
Yeah, well, the northern part of the
not the balmy tropical part of Montana.
No, the northern part of the reservation touches the Canadian border.
Yeah. Yep. That's and
it's not just Montana. It's
the size
Montana.
of Rhode Island. And how many cops did he say?
12.
Like a dozen. Yeah, that's crazy. And you wonder why there's problems. All right, we got some Cam Newton news coming up.
We're doing red and green.
Red and green, right? Red and green makes a return.
Darn right.
Hell yeah.